So as we begin to turn our attention to spring practices and as we begin to get excited about the Crimson Tide's revenge tour in 2022, we first need to have a conversation about the early enrollees that Alabama was able to get in. Because when you look at this list, there are names and there are position groups that are sure to generate excitement, and we need to break it down. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe we will see any of these early enrollees contribute in the fall? And let me know what you're thinking, and let me know who. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And we just passed 11,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you enough for all the support as we continue to build an awesome community of college football fans. And if you enjoyed this content, like and comment down below. That's not just simply relegated for my channel. Any content creators, you enjoy their work, be sure to interact with the videos because it is a massive help for getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said, let's hop right into this because there's a lot of exciting content for us to break down in this video, and we need to hop on it. Because when you look, we first need to start with this class in its entirety. Because even though it didn't rank as the #1 class in the nation like the previous class for the Crimson Tide, that means absolutely nothing. This group right here is going to be a special group, and when we look, the Crimson Tide actually fielded the highest average player rank in recruiting this past season. So even though Alabama came in second, they had the highest average recruit rank, which does mean a great deal. And they got a lot of necessary talent. When you look from top to bottom, there's a lot of cohesiveness in the class, and that's one thing I always talk about in recruiting. People can point out that this institution or this institution signed a really good recruiting class, but does that class have cohesion? And if the answer is no, you really didn't serve the purpose you went out to do. Something that Nick Saban has never had a problem with in signing classes that have cohesion. But when we look at the early enrollees specifically, that's where I think a lot of excitement can be generated. Because the Crimson Tide had technically three 5-stars early enroll, one of which was bumped down to a 4-star because of LT Overton reclassifying from the class of 2023 to the class of 2022, and that individual was Aaron Anderson. But I absolutely believe he's still a 5-star, so we're going to refer to him as a 5-star wide receiver. But the 5 stars who early enrolled for Alabama are Jeremiah Alexander, Jahad Campbell, Aaron Anderson, and Ty Simpson. So you have 2 on defense, 2 on offense. Ty Simpson, the 5-star signal caller, coming in to add more depth to that quarterback room that returns the Heisman Trophy winner, and then Jalen Milroe, the quarterback from Texas, who's turned heads in his time with the Crimson Tide. There's going to be a lot of healthy competition in that room. Iron sharpens iron. We've talked about that plenty. We don't need to go over that. But anytime you can get in a 5-star quarterback, you don't argue with it, especially when that 5-star quarterback early enrolls the way Ty Simpson did. Simpson's going to be an intriguing prospect, but I love the fact that he's there early, getting to work in the same room as Bryce Young. It's just going to be awesome to see. But Aaron Anderson is a name that you have to be very excited comes in early for the Crimson Tide, especially when you look at the wide receiver losses Alabama is set to sustain. Both with John Mechie, Jamison Williams, and then Slade Bolden, there's opportunity at that wide receiver position, and especially for a talent such as Aaron Anderson, because that slot wide receiver position is up for grabs, or at the very least, it's going to be a rotational position. JoJo Earl, still on campus, very talented freshman, going to be sophomore next year out of Aledo, Texas, with rare burst, but Aaron Anderson has a lot of the same skill set. It's just going to be very interesting to see how that room ends up developing, because there's a lot of talent in the room. That's one thing I constantly talk about when we're referring to these wide receiver groups for the Crimson Tide. I'm not worried. It's just going to be interesting to see who steps up, because the talent is certainly there. But on the defensive side of the ball, we talked not long ago about how Alabama has the deepest edge rush room in the nation, and they add in 2 more 5-stars in Jeremiah Alexander and Jahad Campbell. And intriguingly enough, whenever we're talking about some of the most intriguing playmakers in last year's recruiting cycle, so the most intriguing players in the class of 2022, Jahad Campbell must be on the top 10 of that list. Must. because he has versatility that you just can't coach. I mean, goodness gracious, I'm not saying he's Micah Parsons, he's Jahad Campbell, but 24/7 Sports has comped him to Micah Parsons, who does everything for the Dallas Cowboys defense. Nick Saban has talked about how Campbell has the ability to play outside, play inside. There's a few different things he can do. And if you saw the video that was just released with Campbell training in Tuscaloosa, this kid right here looks to have rare burst, and apparently he's ran a 4.440. So you could have a freakish athletic inside linebacker at a 4.440 speed. Campbell is a name we have got to keep an eye on. But it's not just all on that defensive front / linebacker position, whether Campbell plays inside or outside. Time will only tell. You also have Jeremiah Alexander coming in, the #1 edge rush in the nation, a player out of Thompson High School in Alabama, someone you love to get in not only because of how talented he is, but what it means for continuing a successful pipeline to a very talented high school. Alexander's a name we have to keep an eye on. It just so happens that he enters the room that's the deepest in college football. I just don't think it'll take long for him to make a name for himself. But when we look, the offensive line also gets some help in Dane Shore and Tyler Booker. And Tyler Booker was turning heads through the All-American process. He's a name we need to watch. It's very difficult for offensive linemen to come in and make a real difference year one. Not saying it doesn't happen. It certainly does happen. It's not necessarily unique. I'm saying it's difficult because there's a massive difference in the physicality, the speed, and the way offensive line play is conducted at the college level as compared to the high school level. Even then, Tyler Booker was an individual turning heads at the highest level of high school competition. And so getting him into this room is only going to be a net positive. Whether he is an individual that contributes next fall or not remains to be seen. But the fact that he turned so many heads not only in his time playing high school football, but his time also on the All-American circuits mean he's a very talented player who can help competition in this room. It can help guys push themselves because they see someone else in the room that could reasonably take their job. So I love getting Tyler Booker in. Dane Shore is an individual who's going to be very talented. He adds more depth into this offensive line room, a position group that I would imagine most Crimson Tide fans are most interested in the spring. And in fact, drop that down in the comments. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you first off, but let me know which position group you're most interested in come the spring. But if you are interested in the defensive line, I have great news for you there, because the defensive line gets in some names that are going to be major additions. We're talking Curtis Perry, we're talking Jaheim Otis, two names that actually, if you said they got contributing snaps this fall, I really wouldn't bat an eyelash. Curtis Perry plays with violence, and Jaheim Otis can plug up the run. I think both of these guys are major additions to that defensive front. They're the type of talent that Alabama needs, and especially if you can combine what Alabama signed on the defensive front in this class with what they could sign in the class of 2023 when you look at how loaded the state of Alabama is, that's when you're painting a beautiful picture, one that I hope to see. So we have to keep an eye on that. But a lot of exciting talent on the defensive line. I already talked about the linebacker position, but I was remiss in not mentioning Sean Murphy, who Dick Butkus himself called out and said this guy right here is an elite talent, and even compared him to Nakobe Dean. The same Nakobe Dean Tide fans just watched play for Georgia, the same Nakobe Dean that's destined to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. That's high praise from one of the best linebackers to ever play the game of football. We talked about Aaron Anderson, but he's not alone. Kendrick Law coming in, playing wide receiver, and having immense ability. Kendrick Law is one of the more intriguing prospects in the class. Someone that Alabama was very lucky to get a hold of. Multiple other institutions were hoping that they would not be able to get in Kendrick Law so that they had a chance at Kendrick Law, but alas, Nick Saban wins out once again, adding even more depth to that wide receiver room, only furthering why I say I'm curious about the wide receiver room, maybe a little bit cautiously curious, but not full-blown concerned. Now, tight end is an interesting position for the Crimson Tide, and they're very lucky they get an early enroll at that position due to losing Skinner and then having Jaleel Billingsley transferred. Now, in a perfect world, Nablack would have also been an early enrollee, but Elijah Brown is a guy that you're very happy to get in. Brown is a very traditional tight end with really impressive receiving ability, but he has the ability to be a successful blocker, and when you had the offensive line woes that the Crimson Tide had, getting in that type of guy to come in and be able to help your offensive offensive line along while also adding in a weapon, in my opinion, is a major win-win. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this video is about the guys that were going to generate excitement, and we've talked about all of them. Well, we haven't talked about all of them yet because we have two more names that we are going to talk about. First off, Jamarian Miller, the running back. The Crimson Tide's running back room is one that was decimated by injuries this past offseason, and it really adversely affected the offense. At the point where there was so little depth in the running back room, the vast majority of the Alabama offense was put on Bryce Young's shoulders. Now, it just so happens that those are very capable shoulders to put an offense on, but alas, if you don't have to do that, you don't want to do that. Because you can imagine if you take a little bit of pressure off Bryce Young, if you make the offense a little bit more multifaceted, defenses can't key in on Bryce the way they did, so it's going to help the entire offense. Now, Alabama was very lucky to get in Jahmyr Gibbs via the transfer portal, and I think he is set for a monster season, but these new guys can contribute as well because the ability to do so will be there, and Jamarian Miller is a guy that has a lot of ability, both traditionally and out the backfield. He's a name we need to keep an eye on in a position group that sustained a lot of injuries last season, but finally, last but certainly not least, Traquan Fegans, the defensive back. And the defensive back room for Alabama is one that's going to be interesting. There's a lot of talent in the room, and Alabama's very lucky to return Jordan Battle and Helms, but the play in that room has been inconsistent for a little bit. Now, I contend a lot of that inconsistencies has to do with not being able to have the same guys on the field throughout an entire season due to injuries. Alabama's just been very unlucky in that department in the defensive back room, and when you look at some of the games last year, some of these big plays, in my opinion, were just miscommunications with a new defensive back that hadn't had a lot of time playing with the safeties, and there was a miscommunication as to whether or not there was safety help over top. So I think that's going to be fixed with time, but getting in a guy such as Traquan Fegans is certainly a way to fix it. The Traquan Fegans move is big because Alabama is going to be needing defensive back help, which is why they're prioritizing it in the class of 2023. Getting in Ricks from the transfer portal is fantastic, but what happens after that? That's the question that must be answered, because as much upside as I do believe this year's group for the Crimson Tide secondary has, with McKinstry, Ricks, Battle, Helms, Branch, and more, what happens after this year? One would assume a lot of those names are going to be hitting the NFL, and at that point, having guys such as Fegan are going to be paramount. So when you look at this in its entirety, the Crimson Tide have got a lot to be excited about. This past recruiting class is one that is really, really solid, and I'm very interested to see who could contribute early, because there are some very intriguing playmakers Nick Saban and company were able to get. But y'all know what I would like to hear. I want to hear from y'all. Who are you looking forward to? That's it. See ya.